It was an ordinary day at a small-town McDonald's restaurant. The noise of fryers, orders being exchanged, and people coming and going created a monotonous atmosphere. A 26-year-old young man named Marcos had worked at the restaurant for almost 2 years. It wasn't a job he dreamed of, but it was the only one he had to support himself, and the routine had led him to a kind of apathy that was only broken when a special client arrived or something out of the ordinary happened. Today, the day seemed to be like any other. Marcos was serving hamburgers when he noticed a man entering the restaurant. He didn't look like an ordinary customer. He wore a brightly colored shirt and had a presence that caught everyone's eyes. She didn't recognize him right away, but there was something familiar about him. The man placed an order and sat at a table with his friends, who also seemed to be people with a peculiar air. The day progressed between quick orders and impatient customers. But an unexpected event happened when, in a moment of distraction, Marcos mixed up an order and ended up serving an extra meal. It was an innocent mistake, but without knowing it, he was about to do something that would change his life. Marcos looked towards the strange man's table, and realizing his mistake, he quickly went to apologize. When he reached his table, the man looked at him and smiled. "Don't worry, it's okay," he said as he accepted the extra food without complaint. "Thanks for the gesture. You're the one who does all the work here, right?" Marcos, somewhat confused by the man's kindness, responded, "Yes, well, I always try to do the best I can." But I couldn't help but feel that there was something strange about the conversation. He was not an ordinary customer. After a few minutes, the man stood up, and in a whisper that Marcos could barely hear, said, "I'm MrBeast. I'm recording a video for my channel." Marcos frowned, still not understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. MrBeast, the famous YouTuber known for his extreme challenges and generous donations, was there in his restaurant, and he had just served him extra food without asking for it. What happened next was even more surprising. The owner of the restaurant, seeing the situation, quickly approached. The expression on his face changed instantly. It didn't take him long to understand what had happened, and without further ado, he decided to fire Marcos in front of everyone. "This is unacceptable. You have gone too far, now go away," he said as his eyes filled with indignation. Without an explanation, without a second chance, Marcos was fired from his job without notice. No one, not even MrBeast, could intervene. Marcos stayed there in the middle of the restaurant, empty of customers, with the McDonald's doors closing behind him. The heat of the messy premises felt like a prison as he left the building, his mind going blank. He didn't know how or why, but his life had just changed forever. Marcos, confused and bewildered, begins to walk down the sidewalk, thinking about his future. Everything he had built, his entire routine, vanished in a single instant due to a seemingly innocent action. As he walked, he felt the weight of his desperation. No job, no money, and a feeling that everything he knew had slipped through his fingers. Marcos thought his life was over, but in the next twist of fate, he would find an opportunity that no one could have imagined. Marcos walked aimlessly down the street, with his hands in his pockets and his head down. The bustle of the city seemed oblivious to his pain. A distant noise that could not reach his thoughts, trapped in the desolation he felt. The humiliation of being fired from his job at McDonald's was too strong. Everything had happened so quickly. He didn't understand how something so simple, an act of kindness, had ended up destroying everything he knew. Suddenly, his daily routine, the one that seemed tedious but comforting, had fallen apart in the blink of an eye. The silence in his mind was interrupted only by the murmurs of passers-by passing by. But to him, everything felt distant. What did I do wrong? I thought over and over again, repeating the same questions, looking for answers that didn't come. He sat on a nearby park bench, not wanting to return to his apartment, as if just entering his empty house reminded him of what he had just lost. The place where I had found some stability and the small hope of a better life no longer existed. Marcus's phone vibrated. It was a text message from a friend asking if everything was okay. Marcos didn't even read it. There was no way to explain what had happened without feeling humiliated once again. How could he tell his mother that he had lost his job because of a simple mistake? How did you tell your friends that you had been fired for giving free food to someone famous without any intention of doing anything wrong? Without work, without income, and with increasingly strong economic pressure, fear was beginning to take over him. I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent next month, or how I was going to buy food. He thought about looking for another job, but reality hit him even harder. He knew that the news of his dismissal from McDonald's was not going to remain a secret. Rumors always spread fast, and he was sure that any future employer would see him as a risk, as a troublemaker. Plus, pride kept him from asking for help. He knew that if he turned to his family, he would see them with sadness and disappointment. In their eyes, how was I going to face rejection? They had always had high expectations for him, and now he seemed to have failed miserably. Marcos got up from the bench and began to walk aimlessly, anguish invading every corner of his body. His future was uncertain, and life seemed to have dealt him a blow from which he could not recover. For the first time, he felt a deep sadness, a feeling of total defeat. He thought about his youthful dreams, those that he had always kept in his heart, of one day achieving something great, something that would make him feel proud. But the reality was different. At that moment, sitting on the street, it seemed like none of that would be possible. Several hours passed before Marcos decided to return to his apartment. As I walked through the deserted streets, I thought about what had happened at the restaurant. He saw himself as the guy who made a dumb mistake, a mistake he shouldn't have made. He felt like he had broken something that he could never repair, and that feeling completely drowned him. His mind was filled with dark thoughts, and he couldn't help but wonder if everything he had done until now had been in vain. What did his life mean if he couldn't even keep a job at McDonald's? Time seemed to stand still as I passed closed stores and unlit lights. He wondered if he would ever be able to get up from that fall, if I had the strength to start again. But inside, I felt like everything was lost. Shame wrapped around him like a heavy blanket, and as he moved forward, his steps felt slower and slower. The future seemed so distant, so inaccessible, that Marcos began to wonder if he would ever be able to achieve his dreams again. Upon arriving at his apartment, he lay down on the bed without wanting to do anything. He was alone in the darkness of the room, feeling the weight of despair take over him. The hours passed, but he didn't even notice. The protagonist feels the absolute helplessness of not being able to change what had happened. The emotional burden is unbearable, and anxiety consumes him. At that moment, the only thing you can do is let yourself be carried away by sadness, thinking that perhaps you will never be able to get out of that spiral of despair. The days turned into weeks, and Marcos, despite his desperation, continued looking for work. He knew it was the only way out of the hole he found himself in. Options were limited, and the feeling of hopelessness seemed to take over him more with each door that closed. The phone was ringing, but it was rarely good news. The interviews he had obtained were not bringing him results, and employers were quick to ask uncomfortable questions about his dismissal from McDonald's. Every time the incident was mentioned to him, he felt his stomach twist, as if the weight of shame were crushing him. Marcos had learned something painful. The stigma of having been fired for a silly mistake had become a shadow that followed him. Everywhere he applied, the response was the same: "I'm sorry, but we don't think you're right for the job." A few were polite, but others simply didn't bother to give an explanation, and Marcos couldn't help but think that it was all because of what had happened at his previous job. People saw his dismissal as a sign of incompetence, something he couldn't easily erase. In his mind, the voices from the past grew louder and louder. He remembered his co-workers at McDonald's, those who always told him that his dreams were not worth fighting for. "Who do you think you are?" one of them had said to him in a casual conversation. "Look what you are, just another guy serving burgers. There is no future in that, Marcos. The only thing you can do is stay here and endure." In his mind, those words continued to echo, and with each rejection, it seemed like his own fears were confirmed. The feeling of uselessness enveloped him more and more. In his mind, the dream of being more than just a fast food restaurant worker seemed as far away as an unattainable star. The world seemed to have turned its back on him, and Marcos wondered if he would ever be able to find something that really made him feel fulfilled, something that would give meaning to his life. At that moment, he realized that the simple act of wanting to be someone else, of wanting to build something out of the ordinary, seemed to be an illusion. But the situation got even worse when a childhood friend, Sergio, appeared in his life. Marcos hadn't seen him in years, but he knew that Sergio had always been one of the people who had shown him support in his youth. However, what happened that day was more devastating than any other rejection. Sergio, upon learning about Marcos' situation, decided to meet with him to chat and perhaps offer him some advice. But what Marcos did not expect was the harshness of his friend's words. "Marcos, I don't know what you're expecting, but your dream of being more than just a worker is an illusion," Sergio told him, as he leaned back in his chair with a cold look. "Look, everyone else in our generation is making smart decisions. People like you and me, who are not part of the right circles, can't hope for more. You may be a good guy, but the reality is that life is not a fairy tale. You have to accept that what is happening is what you get. Stop dreaming about big things and accept what you have." Sergio's words hit Marcos like a slap. His friend, who had once been an ally, now viewed him with disdain, as someone who deserved no more than what he already had. The cruel reality of that conversation settled in his heart, and the despair grew stronger. That dream of doing something big, something significant, seemed to crumble before his eyes. Doubt began to take over him even more. Was he really wasting his time chasing an illusion? Marcos left the meeting with Sergio feeling smaller than ever. His friend's words struck a chord, and for the first time in a long time, he felt that perhaps what he said had some truth. Who was he to dream of something bigger? What made him different from all those others who simply made do with what life gave them? That afternoon, he sat on a park bench, staring into space. The streets around him remained the same, but for him, the world had changed. The future no longer looked so promising. The rejection, doubts, and humiliation of losing his job had brought him to a point where he felt absolutely lost. With every word from his friend and every job rejection, the dream of a better life slowly faded, like a shadow that never disappeared. Marcos began to believe that perhaps everything had been in vain. Perhaps he would never be able to change his destiny, and perhaps the destiny of working at McDonald's was the only thing that awaited him. It was a gray day, typical for the city, and Marcos barely left his apartment. After weeks of rejections and failures, depression had completely taken over. Although looking for a job was still his priority, he no longer had the strength to try anymore. The doors closed one after another, and his self-esteem, which had been so solid, had shattered into 1,000 pieces. He no longer cared so much about what happened. He felt that his life had become trapped in a routine of misery and frustration. He decided to do something he hadn't done in a long time, go for a walk to clear his mind. Maybe, he thought, just getting away from his apartment would help him find some inspiration or clarity. The streets of the city stretched before him, full of hurrying people, but to Marcos everything seemed unreal. As if he were a spectator in his own life, he walked aimlessly for a couple of hours. He avoided eye contact with others, not wanting to face the discomfort of the looks that saw him as a failure. However, as he strolled down one of the busiest streets, a flash of familiarity crossed his field of vision. It wasn't just any face. He was someone who, in recent months, had been all over the news, on social media, and in the viral videos that Marcos had seen in his moment of desperation. MrBeast, the famous YouTuber, known for his extreme challenges and generous donations, was in front of him. At first, Marcos thought that his mind was playing tricks on him. But when he saw the YouTuber looking at him with an expression of recognition, he knew he wasn't wrong. It was him, MrBeast himself, one of the biggest personalities on the internet. Marcos' breath almost stopped. How could it be that someone like him, such a famous person, was standing in front of him? MrBeast, without missing the opportunity to greet Marcos, motioned for him to come closer. "Hey, you're the McDonald's guy, right?" he asked, a friendly smile on his face. Marcos, still in shock, nodded slowly, unable to understand what was happening. How was it possible that MrBeast recognized him? "I heard about what happened to you, man," MrBeast said, looking at Marcos with a sincere look. "It's crazy that they fired you for something so innocent. But hey, how are you? I didn't see you much on the news after that. Are you okay?" Marcos, with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, began to tell his story. He told her how an impulsive mistake had changed his life forever, how everything had gone down the drain in a matter of hours, and how, despite his efforts to find work, he had been unable to move forward. His voice trembled slightly, but he felt overwhelmed by the simple fact that he was conversing with someone like him. MrBeast listened attentively, nodding and showing his support throughout. At the end of the story, Marcos expected a quick farewell. A simple good luck and for the YouTuber to continue on his way. But what happened next left Marcos speechless. "You know, Marcos, it's crazy how fate plays with us. But I want to tell you something," MrBeast began, fixing his eyes on Marcos's. "I'll be honest with you. I know what it feels like to be trapped in a bad situation, without hope. And I also know that sometimes things line up in strange ways. Look, I don't know if you'd like the idea, but have you considered that your destiny could be in the world of fast food, but in a completely different way?" Marcos did not understand what he was hearing. "Fast food?" he repeated, almost in a whisper. "Yes," MrBeast said, smiling enigmatically. "Maybe it's not just working at McDonald's or something like that. Maybe there's something bigger out there for you. What if I offered you a chance to start something new? Something that would not only change your life, but the lives of many other people as well. Would you be willing to give that crazy idea a chance?" Marcos was stunned. The man standing in front of him, someone who had helped thousands of people and created gigantic projects, was offering him an opportunity he hadn't even thought about. But doubt immediately invaded him. Was this real? Was MrBeast really inviting him to be part of something bigger than himself? The YouTuber, seeing the disbelief in Marcos' eyes, continued, "I know this sounds strange, but I'm thinking about something that has to do with the world of fast food, but with a completely different vision. I'm working on a unique concept to change the way people see these types of restaurants, and you could be part of that transformation. Would you like to be part of something that could revolutionize the sector?" At that moment, Marcos felt a mixture of disbelief, excitement, and fear. Was I dreaming? Was it possible that someone like MrBeast wanted to help him out of that spiral of despair? Could I really have a future in the world of fast food, but not as a simple worker, but as someone who would lead an innovative idea? The possibilities were endless, but also terrifying. Should I trust this unexpected offer? Marcos remained silent, searching within himself for the right words. But all he could do was nod slowly, unable to say anything coherent. Life suddenly seemed to offer him a second chance, and it all depended on whether he was willing to take it. MrBeast's proposal had come like an unexpected bolt of lightning in a storm of uncertainties. Marcos couldn't believe what he had just heard. After weeks of rejection, frustration, and hopelessness, Someone so influential and successful offered him an opportunity. But there was a price, a condition that seemed to be an implicit warning that this path would not be easy. Start from the bottom. You're going to have to start on the lowest floor. MrBeast had told him with a smile that, although friendly, carried a weight of seriousness. No privileges, Marcos. This will be your first step, and you have to earn every moment. But if you are consistent and willing to learn, doors will open for you in ways you can't even imagine. Marcos, still stunned by the offer, cautiously accepted. I didn't have many options. If he wanted to change his destiny, he had to take the chance. Fear of failure and doubt about whether he would be able to adapt seeped into his mind. But the idea of finally doing something with a greater purpose than simply surviving kept him grounded. In the following days, Marcos started working at one of the restaurants in the MrBeast network. From the first moment, he realized that this would not be an easy transition. At first, he was put to work on basic tasks, cleaning tables, preparing ingredients, and learning the inner workings of the kitchen. Everything he had learned at his old job seemed like a joke compared to the magnitude of the operation MrBeast had created. It didn't take long for employees to notice. Marcos was no ordinary rookie, but his calm demeanor and observant approach quickly set him apart. The first days were a constant struggle. Marcos felt like his hands weren't moving fast enough, and the pressure of being constantly evaluated kept him on the brink of collapse. Every time he made a mistake, he felt like he was going backwards. The tensions in the restaurant were palpable. His co-workers, some skeptical, watched him with suspicion. No one knew who he really was, and his lack of experience in such a large environment was evident. However, there was something in his gaze, a determination that did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, after an especially long shift, Marcos was cleaning the station when one of the chefs, a tall, quiet man named Luis, approached him. "You know, you're not like other rookies," he told her bluntly. "At first I thought you would be just another one who would be gone in a few weeks, but you've been trying hard, and that's worth more than anything." Marcos smiled shyly, grateful for the words of support. Luis, despite his apparent coldness, gave him some advice on how to improve in the kitchen, how to organize his time, and most importantly, how to stay calm when the pressure was intense. It was at that moment that Marcos felt he had taken the first real step in his new life. The next day was different. Marcos showed up early, as always, and set out to apply everything he had learned. His meticulous approach and perseverance began to stand out. Instead of just doing what he was asked, he began to anticipate the restaurant's needs. He realized that it wasn't just about following orders, but about understanding the rhythm and dynamics that kept everything going. He began to prepare ingredients without being asked, to organize the place more efficiently, and to help his colleagues without being asked. That afternoon, during the rush hour rush, one of the managers, Javier, observed Marcos working. It was evident that the rookie was gaining confidence and speed, but there was something more to his attitude. The passion and dedication that Marcos put into each movement gave him unexpected visibility. After a while, Javier approached him and with a smile said, "Hey, I've noticed you. You're not the best yet, but there's something that the others don't have. You give your 100% without anyone asking you. That's what we need here." The feeling of being seen, of being recognized, even in a small gesture, became a great drive for Marcos. "I felt like I was finally doing something that made sense, that was worthwhile." Although he was not yet at the top, he felt that every effort brought him closer to something big, something that was not only going to help him get out of his emotional hole, but could also change the course of his life. The turning point came during his second week at the restaurant. During a particularly busy day, when orders were piling up and pressures were beginning to mount, a customer made a complaint about their order. It was a small incident, but all eyes turned to Marcos, who was in charge of managing orders on that shift. Without hesitation, Marcos took control of the situation. Instead of simply apologizing or delegating the task, as many would have done, Marcos approached the customer and calmly and politely resolved the problem. The customer, who was initially upset, calmed down and eventually thanked Marcos for the way he handled the situation. Not everyone would have done so well. "You're different," he said as he left. That small, seemingly trivial gesture made a big difference. Not only had he solved the problem, he had shown his team that he was not willing to give up, that he could adapt and lead, even if it was in a small way. At the end of the shift, Luis and Javier congratulated him for his handling of the client. "Today you took a big step, Marcos." "That's what we need here," said Javier, with an approving smile. Marcos' self-confidence grew that day, like a lighthouse that began to illuminate the path to something better. He knew there was still a long way to go, but that first small achievement was enough to remind him that even though he was starting from the bottom, he had taken the first step towards a completely new life. And that, for the first time in a long time, gave him hope. Time passed, and what began as a simple job at a fast food restaurant in the MrBeast network began to transform into something much bigger for Marcos. With each passing day, he felt more immersed in the world of restaurants, not only as a worker, but as someone who, little by little, was beginning to understand the ins and outs of the business. But what really turned his life around was the unexpected mentorship of one of the most important executives of the MrBeast fast food network. One day, after a particularly grueling shift, one of the higher-level managers approached Marcos. His name was Ricardo, a man of about 45 years old, with years of experience in the fast food industry and very close to MrBeast. He was a direct guy, but he showed a calm and security that immediately conveyed confidence. "Marcos, I have been observing your work. I know you don't have much experience, but you have been demonstrating something that many here do not have: hunger to learn. MrBeast asked me to take you under my wing," Ricardo said, bluntly. Marcos, although grateful, could not help but feel a mixture of nervousness and surprise. It was an honor that someone so important in the MrBeast network wanted to invest their time in it, but I also felt the challenge was enormous. Would I really be able to live up to expectations? Wasn't it too early to talk about leadership in your case? Ricardo, seeing the confusion in Marcos' eyes, calmed him down. "Don't worry. My job is to help you discover what you're really capable of doing. What we're going to do now is different from anything you've ever experienced before." Ricardo's first step was to teach Marcos how to make quick and efficient decisions. In the world of fast food, every minute counts, and the pressure is constant. Customers are waiting, orders are piling up, and you have to deal with unforeseen events that can arise at any time. It's not enough to be fast. You have to be efficient, organized, and above all, stay calm under pressure. During the first weeks of his mentoring, Ricardo put him through a series of practical exercises in which he had to handle unexpected situations. From resolving conflicts between employees to making quick decisions about inventory management and shift organization. In each exercise, Marcos felt like he was crossing a new barrier, but he also discovered something he had never imagined: a desire to lead. Before this process, Marcos had never considered himself a leader. He had always been the guy who did his job without questioning too much and without aspiring for more. But now, seeing how he could influence the work environment, how he could be the driving force that drove his team towards greater efficiency, he began to understand that there were leadership skills in him that he had not discovered until that moment. One of the most difficult exercises was when Ricardo assigned him to supervise an entire shift. On that shift, Marcos had to make sure everything was running perfectly, manage the work team, and make sure customers were satisfied. At one point, when the restaurant was about to be overwhelmed by the number of orders, Marcos realized something important. He couldn't keep up alone. He needed to delegate, trust his team, and communicate clearly and effectively. As he delegated tasks and took charge of coordinating, he began to notice a change in the team dynamic. Not only did the others feel calmer and more organized, but they also began to give him a respect that didn't exist before. During those weeks, Ricardo gave Marcos a series of books on leadership, decision-making, and team management. Although Marcos was not a great reader, he felt that each page he read gave him a broader perspective on what it meant to be a true leader. In his free time, he devoured books, seeking to understand the concepts, but above all, seeing how you could apply those principles in your daily work. Ricardo also took him to important meetings, showing him how the strategic aspects of the restaurant network were managed. Although at first Marcos felt overwhelmed by the amount of details and the magnitude of the business, he soon realized that he had something important: the desire to learn. Every conversation he had with managers, every presentation he witnessed, filled him with new energy. He was entering a world that, in his mind, had always been a distant and almost unreachable place. Now I could see how everything was built, how the decisions executives made impacted the business. The day everything changed occurred during a meeting with MrBeast. After a month of intense mentoring and work at the restaurant, Marcos was nervous about the presentation he was going to give. He had been invited to present some ideas to improve the restaurant's efficiency, and his heart was racing. I knew this was a unique opportunity. Everything he had learned in that time had to be reflected in that presentation. It was his time to shine. When he finally finished his presentation, MrBeast watched him silently, thoughtfully. An awkward silence filled the room, and Marcos began to question if he had done everything wrong. However, MrBeast broke the silence with a smile on his face. "I like what you've proposed," MrBeast said. "You have good ideas, Marcos. But I want to see something more. I want to see you take the next step. I'm going to make you a proposal." Marcos held his breath as he listened. "I want you to take the reins of one of our restaurants. You are going to be in charge of all, from personnel management to customer service. I want you to show that you can lead an entire restaurant, that you have what it takes to lead, not just follow orders. Do you accept it?" Peak of hope. MrBeast's proposal was a ray of light on Marcos' dark horizon. I felt afraid, insecure, but at the same time, something inside told him that this challenge was the one he had been waiting for all his life. I was terrified, but also excited. He had a chance to show that he could be more than just a worker, that he could be a leader. "Yes," Marcos responded, firmly, although his heart was pounding. "I'll accept it." The big day arrived. Marcos had accepted MrBeast's challenge to run his own restaurant within the fast food network. Fear and uncertainty mixed in his stomach, but there was something deeper inside him, a spark of hope that kept him standing. He was about to take the biggest step of his life. After months of learning and working, this was his chance to show that he had learned enough to lead a team. However, things did not go as expected. Opening morning was full of nerves. Marcos arrived early, as he always had, but today was different. This time it wasn't just one of the newer employees. This time, he was responsible. He had to make sure everything worked according to company standards. The pressure was on his back, and although he tried to remain calm, the first signs of trouble began to appear almost immediately. When employees arrived, some seemed more concerned about the novelty of the leadership change than the job itself. The team was not fully prepared for opening day. Several of them did not know their functions well, and some even seemed distrustful, looking at Marcos with a mixture of uncertainty and skepticism. It was not in his plans to accept someone like him at the helm, someone with no direct experience in managing a restaurant. Marcos tried to stay calm. He approached each employee, gave them words of encouragement, and assigned them specific tasks. But soon, the first operational problems began to arise. The ice cream machine broke mid-morning, and the kitchen staff struggled to keep up with orders. The long lines of customers were building up, and the food was taking longer than it should. The pressure was increasing. In the midst of the storm of orders and system failures, the phone began to ring. A major ingredient supplier I had submitted the wrong order, which meant I wouldn't have the supplies I needed to keep functioning throughout the day. The restaurant was already in the middle of the crisis, and this mistake only made things worse. "This isn't working," one of the cooks shouted, exasperated. "We can't continue without these products. What do we do?" Marcos felt helpless for the first time in a long time. He realized that, despite his efforts, things were not under his control. The entire restaurant seemed to be falling apart around them. Had I made the right decision in accepting this challenge? As the hours passed, things did not improve. Chaos took over the place. The kitchen machines kept breaking down, the team couldn't agree on how to organize themselves, and the customers were impatient. Frustrated murmurs could be heard from some in line, and some even left before being served. The restaurant, instead of being a reflection of success, became a battlefield. Fear began to take over Marcos. The possibility that his dream of running a restaurant would become a total failure became more real with each passing minute. He felt like his chance to shine, to show that he could make things work, was crumbling before his eyes. There was something inside him that told him he couldn't give up, that he had to keep fighting. But the emotional fatigue and pressure were eating away at him. The emotional peak came when, after several hours of chaos, Marcos saw one of the more experienced employees walk out the door with a tired expression. "I can't take it anymore," he said before disappearing. Marcos didn't say anything, but something inside him broke. What kind of leader was he if he couldn't even keep his team motivated? The situation was completely out of control, and it seemed that the opening of the restaurant was going to be a hopeless catastrophe. Just when he thought all was lost, he received an unexpected call. Was MrBeast. "How's everything going?" he asked in a friendly tone, but Marcos could hear the concern behind his boss's voice. Marcos swallowed before answering. "It's a disaster. Nothing is working. Employees are losing patience, and suppliers got orders wrong. This is out of control." MrBeast's voice, which at other times had sounded so confident and sure, now seemed calm but firm. "Marcos, remember what I told you when you started. Everything has a solution, even when everything seems to be lost. Do you remember the first day you worked with us, when you didn't even know how to make a good sandwich? Look how far you've come since then." Marcos closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. MrBeast continued, "Don't worry about what's happening. Now I trust you, and this is the time to prove yourself. You can overcome it. You just have to be the leader you've been learning to be." The conversation with MrBeast, although brief, was enough to remind Marcos why he was there. He was not just another worker, was the leader of this restaurant, and I had to take control. Without thinking twice, he made an emergency call to his team. He met with the employees and asked them to follow him, to work together to solve the problems. For the first time all day, the team began to react. They reorganized, made quick decisions on how to handle product shortages and order flow. Marcos began to delegate with more confidence, and employees responded to his leadership. Little by little, the tide of chaos began to calm. Not everything was resolved, but the restaurant was beginning to function more efficiently. The great test, it wasn't over yet, but Marcos had already taken the first step towards recovery. Deep inside, he felt like he had reached a point of no return, a place where his destiny would be at stake. It was no longer just a restaurant. It was about his chance to show that he could be a true leader. Despite the grueling opening day and the numerous obstacles he had faced, Marcos knew the only way forward was keep fighting, learn from your mistakes, and reinvent yourself. He couldn't afford to give up. He'd come too far, and despite the initial chaos, something inside him still burned with the belief that he could make things work. After all, who said great success stories were easy? This was his moment of testing. and he wasn't going to let it slip away. In the hours following the opening disaster, Marcos began to engage in deep introspection. He realized that he had made the mistake of trying to follow a rigid model, one that only replicated what others had done before. I didn't have to do everything like the big fast food chains. He had to find his own style. Instead of following the traditional workflow and continuing with the same approach that had failed that day, he decided to go back to the basics, to his roots. Marcos remembered something he had learned from the first day in the MrBeast restaurant. Network, the little things matter. It wasn't just about having the right products or machinery in perfect condition. It was about creating a unique experience, an environment that would make every customer want to return. It was time to focus on the details, on the small gestures that differentiate a common restaurant from a truly memorable one. He began making strategic changes and improvements to the restaurant that not only focused on operational aspects, but also on dealing with employees and customers. Even though some still doubted him, Marcos decided to trust his team and delegate more firmly. Issues with staff remained a constant source of frustration, but he now took the time to speak individually with each team member, motivating them, understanding their concerns, and giving them space to express their ideas was essential to improving morale. In terms of operation, it implemented a more efficient order management system. He hired a local expert to check the faulty machines and step by step was in charge of optimizing the kitchen, looking for ways to make processes faster without compromising quality. Redesigned the workspace to maximize efficiency, rearranging kitchen stations and improving workflow. The key was to create an environment where the team could feel empowered to make quick decisions without losing quality. While all this was happening, Marcos did not stop observing what was happening on social networks. Customers were beginning to leave more positive reviews, with some even highlighting the friendliness of the staff and the personalized attention they had not experienced elsewhere. There was something that made his restaurant special, a human touch that set it apart. It was his personal touch. Marcos knew that he had to continue down that path, although not everyone was convinced that it was enough to change course. The big twist came when, a month later, MrBeast decided to visit the restaurant in person. Without prior notice, he showed up at the restaurant, accompanied by his recording equipment. As part of a video he was preparing about the success stories in his restaurant network. Marcos, nervous, prepared for the worst, since he knew that the errors at the beginning still left a shadow over the operation. However, when MrBeast walked through the restaurant, he seemed surprised by the change he had experienced in such a short time. "This is incredible, Marcos. This place has something special." The look of satisfaction in MrBeast's eyes did not go unnoticed. The restaurant was now full of customers enjoying their food and the atmosphere that Marcos had cultivated. There was something different in the air, something that couldn't be put into words, but that everyone felt. Marcos' effort, the change he had made, was being reflected in the success of the business. MrBeast, single quotes, S famous face could not hide his surprise and admiration. "I knew you had something special. I'm glad to see that all this effort has paid off. This restaurant is doing much better than I had expected." With a broad smile, he added, "What you have achieved in such a short time is impressive." That same afternoon, after observing the operation live and receiving praise for the customer service, MrBeast made an even more exciting proposal. "Marcos, I want you to lead an expansion of this concept. The model you have created here has a lot of potential. I want you in charge of more restaurants. Let's grow this." Despite the grueling opening day and the numerous obstacles he had faced, Marcos knew the only way forward was keep fighting, learn from your mistakes, and reinvent yourself. He couldn't afford to give up. He'd come too far, and despite the initial chaos, something inside him still burned with the belief that he could make things work. After all, who said great success stories were easy? This was his moment of testing. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. In the hours following the opening disaster, Marcos began to engage in deep introspection. He realized that he had made the mistake of trying to follow a rigid model, one that only replicated what others had done before. I didn't have to do everything like the big fast food chains. He had to find his own style. Instead of following the traditional workflow and continuing with the same approach that had failed that day, he decided to go back to the basics, to his roots. Marcos remembered something he had learned from the first day in the MrBeast restaurant. Network, the little things matter. It wasn't just about having the right products or machinery in perfect condition. It was about creating a unique experience, an environment that would make every customer want to return. It was time to focus on the details, on the small gestures that differentiate a common restaurant from a truly memorable one. He began making strategic changes and improvements to the restaurant that not only focused on operational aspects, but also on dealing with employees and customers. Even though some still doubted him, Marcos decided to trust his team and delegate more firmly. Issues with staff remained a constant source of frustration, but he now took the time to speak individually with each team member, motivating them, understanding their concerns, and giving them space to express their ideas was essential to improving morale. In terms of operation, it implemented a more efficient order management system. He hired a local expert to check the faulty machines and step by step was in charge of optimizing the kitchen, looking for ways to make processes faster without compromising quality. Redesigned the workspace to maximize efficiency, rearranging kitchen stations and improving workflow. The key was to create an environment where the team could feel empowered to make quick decisions without losing quality. While all this was happening, Marcos did not stop observing what was happening on social networks. Customers were beginning to leave more positive reviews, with some even highlighting the friendliness of the staff and the personalized attention they had not experienced elsewhere. There was something that made his restaurant special, a human touch that set it apart. It was his personal touch. Marcos knew that he had to continue down that path, although not everyone was convinced that it was enough to change course. The big twist came when, a month later, MrBeast decided to visit the restaurant in person. Without prior notice, he showed up at the restaurant, accompanied by his recording equipment. As part of a video he was preparing about the success stories in his restaurant network. Marcos, nervous, prepared for the worst, since he knew that the errors at the beginning still left a shadow over the operation. However, when MrBeast walked through the restaurant, he seemed surprised by the change he had experienced in such a short time. "This is incredible, Marcos. This place has something special." The look of satisfaction in MrBeast's eyes did not go unnoticed. The restaurant was now full of customers enjoying their food and the atmosphere that Marcos had cultivated. There was something different in the air, something that couldn't be put into words, but that everyone felt. Marcos' effort, the change he had made, was being reflected in the success of the business. MrBeast, single quotes, S famous face could not hide his surprise and admiration. "I knew you had something special. I'm glad to see that all this effort has paid off. This restaurant is doing much better than I had expected." With a broad smile, he added, "What you have achieved in such a short time is impressive." That same afternoon, after observing the operation live and receiving praise for the customer service, MrBeast made an even more exciting proposal. "Marcos, I want you to lead an expansion of this concept. The model you have created here has a lot of potential. I want you in charge of more restaurants. Let's grow this." After months of tireless work, struggles, sacrifices, and personal improvement, Marcos had achieved something that many would consider a miracle. What started as a simple, dilapidated restaurant, which had barely managed to stay afloat, was now a thriving place with unstoppable growth. The transformation of that business was not just a matter of success in the market, but of personal transformation. Marcos had become a respected leader, and his work had been recognized by everyone, starting with MrBeast. The radical change he had experienced was palpable. The same man who had been fired from his job at McDonald's with no explanation other than an impulsive and ill-advised act, now found himself leading the expansion of an innovative restaurant chain that competed directly with the big brands in the sector. But what was about to happen was going to be even more shocking. One morning, when Marcos was supervising the operation of a new store, his phone rang with an unexpected call from MrBeast. Without a doubt, that moment would be an even bigger turning point in his life. "Marcos, I want you to be part of the executive team of my restaurant network," MrBeast said, with a firm voice full of emotion. "I believe you now have the experience, vision, and leadership to help take this even further. The expansion we are planning will be massive, and I want you to be a vital part of it. You are ready to take the helm of this ship." At first, Marcos couldn't believe what he was hearing. Being part of the executive team of a fast food restaurant network, under the tutelage of someone as influential as MrBeast, it was a dream come true. For years, he had struggled to find such an opportunity, and now, after everything he had been through, he was finally receiving the opportunity to take the next step. It was more than a promotion. It was the recognition that all his effort and perseverance had finally paid off. The protagonist accepted the offer with humility and gratitude, but also with a sense of responsibility that motivated him even more. The challenge of leading not just a store, but a network of restaurants that was now in the process of global expansion was enormous. But Marcos had learned to face challenges with courage and determination. "I knew that although the road would never be easy, I now had the tools and support necessary to succeed." The transition from being a simple restaurant manager to executive team leader of the MrBeast restaurant network was not immediate, but it happened quickly. Marcos, armed with his acquired knowledge of the restaurant operation, his ability to adapt, and the trust he had gained within the company, began to implement strategic changes that took the brand to new heights. The first thing he did was revitalize brand image. Marcos had a clear vision of what he wanted to achieve: a fast food restaurant that was not only recognized for its food, but also for the unique experience it offered. Their focus on quality, customer service, and the distinctive atmosphere of each location were reflected in every detail of the new openings. It wasn't just about selling burgers or fries. It was about creating a space where people wanted to spend time and enjoy a memorable experience. Marcos also promoted the use of advanced technology in customer service. Instead of following the traditional in-person ordering model, it introduced more streamlined digital ordering systems with mobile apps that offered personalized options and fast delivery. Not only did restaurants operate more efficiently, they became more accessible and attractive to modern customers who valued speed and technology in their dining experience. As new restaurants opened in different parts of the world, the impact of MrBeast's restaurant network soon became evident. The brand had positioned itself as a benchmark in the fast food sector, not only for its value proposition, but for its innovative and human approach. Clients not only felt well-fed, but they also felt connected to a story of improvement, hard work, and resilience. In his new role, Marcos also played a pivotal role in training and leading new managers. Instead of seeing success only as a personal benefit, he dedicated himself to sharing his knowledge and experience with his team. He became a mentor to those who, like him, started at the bottom, inspiring them to dream big and work tirelessly to achieve it. The business culture that Marcos fostered within the MrBeast restaurant network was based on the personal and professional growth of each team member. The trust that MrBeast had placed in Marcos was rewarded, not only because of the financial results, but because of the change in mentality that was established in the company. Restaurants were now known not only for their quality food, but for being places where employees felt like they truly belonged and had a purpose. Success became a collective effort, and the team was more united than ever. As Marcos continued to lead successfully, his name began to be recognized beyond the MrBeast restaurant network. The media and entrepreneurship platforms called him to tell his story, from fired worker to executive of one of the most innovative and successful restaurant chains in the world. Marcos' story became an inspiration for thousands of people who once felt defeated as he had once felt. Now he was living proof that, with effort, perseverance, and vision, you could overcome any obstacle and achieve success. Recognition didn't just come in the form of business success. Marcos began to receive invitations for conferences, interviews, and most importantly, opportunities to further expand his legacy. Years of struggle, sacrifice, and moments of desperation had finally brought him to the top. And although he never forgot his humble beginnings, he was now in a position to help others achieve the success he had achieved. After years of struggle, overcoming obstacles and working tirelessly, Marcos I was finally in a position of power. He was no longer that young man without direction or opportunities who had been fired from a McDonald's for an impulsive mistake. Now was a high-level executive at the MrBeast restaurant network, a respected and successful man, known for his vision and his ability to transform what seemed to be a disaster into a true success story. As is often the case with people who have been through great trials, Marcos did not forget where he came from. Memories of those early days of frustration, when the weight of humiliation and rejection consumed him, were still present in his mind. I knew that he had risen to the top not only because of his hard work and dedication, but also because of the opportunities that had been denied to him before. And now I had the opportunity to close the cycle. One day, while supervising one of the new openings of the MrBeast restaurant chain, an idea occurred to him: go back to your old McDonald's, but this time not as the man who had been fired, but as a powerful executive. The idea lingered in his head for several days. He thought it wasn't just about personal revenge, but about the lesson he could teach all those who ever looked down on him. He wanted to show them that the path he had taken was the right one, and that his decision to help MrBeast had been one of the best he had ever made in his life. So one day, he showed up at his old McDonald's. In the past, this place had been his world, the only place where he thought he could make a living. The place that had fired him in the most humiliating way now saw him return, not as a simple worker, but as someone who had achieved success and who had the ability to transform everything he touched. When he entered, the looks of his former co-workers were a mix of surprise and respect. Some even approached, surprised to see him in a position so different from the one he had occupied years ago. One of the former managers, the same one who had given him the news of his dismissal, approached Marcos. Years before, that man had looked at him with disdain, trying to minimize his effort. Now he seemed uncomfortable, as if he didn't know how to react to the success of someone who, in his mind, had no future. Marcos, with unwavering calm, looked him in the eyes. "Hello, old friend. How are you? I see that everything is still the same here." The irony in his words was clear, but there was no rancor in his tone. Somehow Marcos had learned to put the pain of his dismissal behind him, understanding that his success did not need to be validated by those who did not believe in him. "Marcos, I can't believe it. It's amazing to see you here in this position. What have you been doing?" The manager, now with a hint of humility in his voice, seemed to not know what to say. He knew that the man in front of him had achieved something that few around him would have imagined. "Well, after I got fired, I decided to take a different path. I didn't wait for opportunities to come to me, but I went looking for them. Today, I am part of the executive team at MrBeast. My life has completely changed since I made that decision," Marcos responded, with a soft smile. There was no need to say more. His success spoke for itself. While Marcos toured the facilities, observing every corner of that McDonald's, he realized how far he had come. The restaurant that had once been his world now seemed small, limited, almost claustrophobic, compared to the great opportunities he had found in his new life. This place, which had once represented his dreams and his frustration, now only reminded him that the decisions we make in life can determine our fortunes. At the end of the tour, Marcos approached the people who had fired him, those who, at the time, thought that he would have no future, and he said to them, "Thank you for showing me that I should never settle for what I have. Thank you for giving me the push I needed to change my life." Maybe they didn't tell me directly, but that humiliation was what gave me the strength to keep going. So don't forget that sometimes the best opportunities come when everything seems lost. This message, although direct, was not delivered with animosity, but with the wisdom of someone who had overcome obstacles. Instead of seeking revenge or resentment, Marcos chose a more powerful path: gratitude. Instead of destroying those who once looked down on him, he showed them that their failure was just a stepping stone on his path to success. In his heart, Marcos knew that the greatest thing of all was not to return to show them that he had won, but show them that they did not have the power to define their future. The impact of his return was immediate. Not only those who knew him from his work at McDonald's were surprised, but also those who were now part of the MrBeast restaurant network. Marcos had given them an important lesson about resilience, the power of decision, and the ability to change. The rules of the game. True revenge was not in resentment, but in triumph. Marcos had not only shown that he was better off without the limitations of his old job, but he had also made it clear that the true power of a human being is not measured by where he starts, but by the will to continue towards the top, regardless of the obstacles. Marcos, he had come a long way since that fateful day when he was fired from his job at McDonald's. Now in his role as a high-level executive within the restaurant network of MrBeast, his life had completely changed. The transition from being a simple fast food worker to a leader in the industry was a journey that was full of sacrifices, challenges, and above all, impressive personal and professional growth. But what filled him most with pride was not only his own success, but what his story represented to others. Under his leadership, the brand MrBeast not only had it achieved resounding success, but it had begun its global expansion. Restaurants in several countries, from the United States to Europe, opened their doors, and with each new opening, Marcos, he felt more inspired. Now, not only was he part of a fast food network, he was helping to build something much bigger, a movement. A movement based on personal improvement, the fight against adversity, and above all, the opportunity for those who thought there was no longer hope. The restaurant that Marcos had run, initially full of problems, was now a jewel within the chain. The teams he led prospered, and his leadership was admired by all. In every corner of the world where the MrBeast brand expanded, Marcos was there, supervising, making sure the values of perseverance and self-improvement remained intact. He was a role model, not only for employees, but also for those who wanted to get into the business but felt they didn't have the tools or opportunity to do so. During one of the openings of a new restaurant in a distant city, Marcos gave a speech in which he talked about his own experience. He stood in front of the new employees, all of them from different parts of the world, many of them with stories similar to his own. People who had been discarded by society, who came from humble families, who had hit rock bottom, but who now saw a unique opportunity. "I know what it's like to feel like the world is against you," Marcos said. "I know what it's like to be rejected and considered a failure. But what I learned is that sometimes the biggest failures are just the first step to success. This restaurant is not just a business. It is an opportunity for all of us to change our lives. It is proof that no one, absolutely no one, is condemned to always live in the shadows." That night, after the speech, Marcos stared at the restaurant full of smiling people, working with enthusiasm and optimism. He remembered his first day in that kind of environment, when everything seemed like an insurmountable challenge. How had he gotten this far? How had he managed to turn that place, with so many mistakes and difficulties, into such a resounding success? The answer was in your own evolution. He had learned to lead not from a distance, but by being on the ground, shoulder to shoulder with his employees. He had discovered that true success lies not only in the expansion of a company or financial growth, but in the personal transformation of those who are part of your team. The stories of the employees he had hired, many of whom came from situations similar to his, filled him with pride. And in new employees, Marcos saw something that he himself had had, a spark, an opportunity for redemption. I saw them fight for a better life, to show that they could do more than the mistakes of the past. Marcos, like MrBeast, believed deeply in the idea of giving second chances. For him, each person he hired represented a story of hope and renewal, and made sure to give them all the tool possible to succeed. As the months passed, the employees not only performed their duties in an exemplary manner, but many of them began to move up quickly within the chain. The values Marcos promoted were contagious, and each restaurant became a microcosm of determination and personal improvement. One afternoon, while overseeing the expansion of a new restaurant in London, Marcos received a message on his phone. It was a short video from a former employee at one of his first restaurants. In the video, the young man thanked Marcos for giving him a chance when everyone else closed their doors to him. "Thank you, Marcos, for showing me that a mistake does not define me. Thanks for giving me a chance. Today I am the manager of my own restaurant, and I owe everything I am to that first opportunity you gave me." Marcos couldn't help but smile, knowing that more and more people were transforming their lives, just as he had done. That was the true essence of their success. It wasn't just about expanding a brand, but creating a legacy of personal transformation. He had helped so many people find their own path and realize that circumstances don't define who you are, but what you do with those circumstances. With the passage of time, Marcos became a benchmark in the fast food industry, but not only for his business achievements, but for the culture he had fostered within the MrBeast restaurant network. A culture of opportunities, hard work, innovation, but above all, hope. The path that Marcos had traveled had not only transformed him, but it also transformed thousands of people who, like him, once thought that the dream of a better life was just that, a dream. But over time, Marcos showed that, if you fight for what you really want and don't give up, dreams become a possible reality. Everything seemed to be going well for Marcos. MrBeast's restaurant network was at its peak of expansion, and with his leadership, previous challenges seemed to be behind us. However, in the business world, victories are fleeting, and a new obstacle always appears to test everything you have achieved. A powerful competitor had entered the scene, ready to destroy the reputation that had cost so much to build. The news came one sunny morning. A new player in the market, a gigantic international chain, had started opening branches right in the places where MrBeast restaurants were thriving. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a new company looking to do its part in a competitive market, but the tactics it used to gain customers were unfair. They began offering lower prices, employed aggressive advertising campaigns, and worst of all, began spreading malicious rumors about the quality of the MrBeast chain's products. At first, Marcos thought it was a momentary attack. Competitors always existed in business, and rumors and smear campaigns were just a cheap tactic. But he soon realized that it was not that simple. Sales began to decline, and although the quality of the products remained excellent, consumer perception began to suffer. Rumors about the MrBeast chain became a serious problem, and what seemed like a passing threat quickly became an existential challenge for the company. The following weeks were of real pressure to Marcos. As the crisis escalated, he began meeting with his executive colleagues to seek a solution. However, the problems did not only come from outside. The competition knew exactly how to exploit internal cracks. The MrBeast chain had been a pioneer in many things, but the rapid growth had left certain gaps in the processes especially in logistics and quality control. The situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Sales figures fell drastically, and the atmosphere within the company became tense. Investors were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions, and some of the key team members began to show signs of distrust. Marcos felt the pressure like never before. He was not only defending his career, but also MrBeast's legacy and the lives of thousands of employees who depended on the company's success. The future of the brand was hanging by a thread, and everything he had achieved seemed to crumble before his eyes. In his mind, the solutions quickly went from being marketing strategies to something much deeper. This wasn't just a corporate attack. Something bigger was at stake: the reputation he had worked so hard to build, the trust he had placed in his team, and the opportunities that so many employees had received. Marcos knew he had to act quickly, and not only with a business response, but also with a strategic vision. The challenge was twofold. On the one hand, it had to counteract the attacks of the competition. On the other hand, it had to manage the internal wear and tear that the crisis was generating within its own network. It needed an immediate solution, something that could stop the decline, but it also needed a long-term strategy to restore the brand's image and consolidate the loyalty of its employees. One afternoon, after hours of non-stop meetings and a growing tiredness on the faces of everyone involved, Marcos had a radical idea. Instead of fighting the competition directly with low prices or smear campaigns, it decided to do something that would not only restore the brand's image, but could turn this obstacle into a unique opportunity to redefine the company's future. The plan was risky. Marcos proposed a series of innovations in customer experience that would be so surprising and attractive that no one could resist them. But there was a problem. To carry out this strategy, Marcos would have to make structural changes within the company, which involved significant financial resources and the full commitment of all employees. It was at this moment of maximum tension that Marcos realized that this challenge was not only business, but also emotional. The decisions he would make would not only impact the numbers, but also the well-being of his team. Every one of those employees I had seen grow up, those who came from difficult situations, deserved to have a chance to succeed. The first step was a great meeting with all the chain executives, where Marcos presented his vision. We have to stop playing the same game as our competition. We are not going to compete with them on prices. Let's redefine what it means to eat fast. We are going to offer a unique experience, something that does not exist anywhere else. No matter what they say about us, we know what we are, and we are going to prove it. The initial reaction was skepticism. Many feared that such a large investment would not generate the expected results. But deep down, Marcos had complete confidence in his vision and the power of teamwork. I had learned that great achievements do not come without sacrifices, and this was a unique opportunity to transform the crisis into something that would elevate the brand to a higher level. So, with a firm decision, Marcos began to take action. It redesigned the menu, introduced innovative new services, and most importantly, launched a massive campaign focused on the human value behind the brand. He decided that his employees, those who had fought alongside him, would be the faces of the campaign. They would be the ones who would tell the stories that reflected the true essence of the company. With this strategic move, Marcos was willing to fight for the future of the brand, facing the competition with innovation, passion, and authentic leadership. The stage was set for a major business battle, and this time, Marcos was not only fighting to save the company's present, but to ensure that the restaurant network was much more than a simple business. I wanted it to be a symbol of improvement, resilience, and solidarity. The road to victory is never easy, and in recent months, Marcos had tested his endurance and leadership abilities to the limit. He had seen his brand face unforeseen challenges, battling a formidable competitor and mounting internal pressure. But like everything in life, crises only opened space for evolution and improvement. In the end, what seemed to be a threat that could destroy his company became an opportunity to demonstrate that the true greatness of a leader lies not only in how he leads, but in how he solves the most complex problems. After months of intense competition, long work hours, and risky decisions, the story began to take an unexpected turn. MrBeast's restaurant network not only managed to withstand the onslaught of its competitor, but emerged even stronger, more innovative, and more stable than ever. Thanks to the radical decisions that Marcos had implemented, the market began to notice a significant change. The new campaign focused on the human experience behind each meal. The revaluation of the brand and the focus on constant innovation caused sales to increase exponentially. The competition, initially confident in its superiority, began to show signs of weakness. It wasn't just that its low prices were no longer enough to win over customers, but that its lack of a genuine focus on customer service and authenticity soon became its biggest weakness. Consumers began to notice that, despite the quality promises, the values behind the MrBeast brand resonated more with them. Customers weren't just buying food, they were buying an experience. They were buying a story that was based on perseverance, self-improvement, and authenticity. That's when the competitor made a desperate decision, began to lower its prices even more. However, this only accelerated his downfall. MrBeast's strategy, headed by Marcos, was not about competing for the lowest prices, but about creating something that was above the competition, a fast food brand that not only fed, but inspired. Market changed rapidly, and what at first seemed like fierce competition became a show of strength for the MrBeast restaurant network. The competitor was defeated, and with this, the MrBeast restaurant chain established itself as the undisputed leader in the industry. It wasn't just a business triumph. It was a testament to Marcos' vision, bravery, and above all, the resilience of a brand that never gave up. Marcos had shown that, with effort, vision, and authenticity, no obstacle was insurmountable. People began to see Marcos not only as a successful executive, but as a true example of self-improvement. The story of how a young McDonald's employee, fired for an impulsive act, had stood up, fought, and defeated one of the biggest competitors in the market, went viral. His name began to be associated with terms such as perseverance, resilience, and leadership. The recognition was instantaneous. The business community, which had previously doubted his ability to meet challenges, now viewed him as a key figure. Within the business world, Marcos' story became a benchmark for success, both inside and outside the fast food industry. His interventions at international conferences and events began to attract crowds, and he was soon invited to participate in leadership forums where he shared his story of struggle and victory. The recognition was not limited only to the business field. Marcos became a symbol of personal improvement for millions of people who, like him, faced difficult times in their lives. His story inspired young entrepreneurs, employees who felt trapped in dead-end jobs, and anyone who ever felt defeated by circumstances. In the media sphere, his story began to be told over and over again. Reports, documentaries, and interviews, they highlighted his struggle, his transformation from a simple worker to an executive leader, and the way in which he had managed to change the destiny of an entire company. The world saw him as someone who had not only been successful in business, but had demonstrated that a person's true worth is not measured by what they have, but by what they are able to achieve despite adversity. However, for Marcos, the real triumph was not fame or public recognition. What really mattered to him was the impact he had had on the lives of so many people. Every time he walked by one of his restaurants and saw an employee who had started in the same conditions he started in, he was reminded why he fought so hard for this opportunity. It was the complete cycle. Now he was not only a business leader, but also a mentor and role model to those who needed a little hope. The most epic moment came when, at one of the company's annual meetings, MrBeast presented Marcos with a Medal of Honor, not only as recognition for their work, but as a symbol of the vision that had transformed the company. The medal was not just an award, but a reminder that when you fight for something you believe in, the results can be amazing. Looking back at his office, Marcos thought about how his life had taken such an unexpected turn. The young man who one day was fired for an impulsive act of generosity now found himself leading one of the most successful restaurant chains in the world, being an example of what it means to never give up. His story had become a legend of perseverance, and his name, associated with that of MrBeast, would be remembered for generations. It was a quiet morning in Marcos' office. Despite the achievements and success he had achieved, there was something in his eyes that still reflected the humility of that young man who one day was fired for an impulsive act. He was looking out the window of his office, a space with a panoramic view of the city that he had seen grow since the first day he joined the MrBeast restaurant network. It was the kind of view that many would consider the ultimate achievement, the symbol of success. But for him, that view was not only a representation of what he had achieved, but also of the long and arduous path he had traveled. In his thoughts, he relived every step of his journey. He remembered the humiliation he felt when he was fired, the feeling of helplessness and despair as he walked down the street without knowing what would become of his future. That day seemed to be the end of his story, but as life had shown him, it was also just the beginning of something much bigger. Impulsive decisions, painful falls, rejections, and failures were what had ultimately shaped him. And looking at everything from the perspective he now had, he understood that those moments of struggle were necessary to achieve what he had achieved. Marcos was always a man of action, but now he was also a man of reflection. His life was no longer just a testimony of personal improvement. His story had become a source of inspiration for thousands of people. He had achieved what many thought was impossible, transforming his life from a simple worker to a successful executive, all thanks to the opportunity MrBeast gave him. But the real transformation didn't just happen in business or public image. The greatest metamorphosis was internal, in his mind and in his heart. On his journey, Marcos learned lessons he never imagined he would learn. He discovered that success is not measured only in terms of profits or positions of power. True success was found in the ability to stay true to yourself, to recognize that each step, no matter how painful, had a purpose. And above all, he learned that, above all, what really mattered was the impact one could have on the lives of others. Every time he saw one of the young people he had hired at his restaurant chain, he thought about how that person could also transform his life, just as he had done. Every time I heard stories of those who, having started in humble positions, were now achieving success, I felt deep gratitude. Because in the end, what Marcos wanted to leave as a legacy was not the company he had built, but the lives he had touched. He knew he wouldn't have achieved anything he had if he hadn't had the opportunity to learn and grow. His story was proof that circumstances don't define who you are, but how you respond to them. The obstacles he had faced, the rejections he had experienced, had only been a way to prepare him for what was to come. And in every step of his journey, there was a force that helped him get up, the belief that no matter how many times you fall, the important thing is to always get up. In his new position, Marcos never forgot where he came from. Every time he encountered an employee who, like he once did, was struggling to find their place in the world, he saw an opportunity to help. He remembered his humble roots and the pain he had felt when he was rejected, and decided to be the person he would have liked to have when he was in his shoes. He knew how hard it was to believe in yourself when the world seemed to be against you, but he also knew how powerful it was when someone offered you a helping hand. So he committed himself to being that helping hand for others. Recognition was never what mattered most to Marcos. Throughout his entire process, at every stage of his success, he was always more focused on the process than the end result. What he valued most was how every decision he made helped someone else. Because deep down, Marcos understood that true power does not reside in high positions or in the wealth you can accumulate. True power lies in the ability to change the lives of others for the better. At the end of the day, while surrounded by his company's achievements and the admiration of many, Marcos sat in his office and wrote a message to himself. A reminder that true success was measured in the people you helped, the opportunities you created for others, and how your own life became a living testament that with resilience, anything is possible. In that message he wrote, "If you ever forget what brought you here, remember that it was never about you, but about what you have done for others. That's what really defines you." At that time, Marcos was not only a successful businessman, but also a fulfilled human being, knowing that his true transformation was not only external, but deeply internal. Marcos was standing in front of the stage at an event where hundreds of people looked at him with admiration. He had achieved the unthinkable. In less than a decade, he had transformed his life from nothing to the top. From the moment he was fired from McDonald's for an impulsive action, to becoming the CEO of a global restaurant network, he had traveled a path full of challenges, learning, and above all, improvement. The event he was at wasn't just another corporate engagement. It was a celebration of the impact he had had on the world, especially on the lives of those who once, like him, thought their dreams were impossible. Marcos was no longer only a man of business success, but also a symbol of hope, perseverance, and change. Throughout his career, he had not only managed to transform a restaurant chain, but he had also touched the lives of thousands of people who, like him in his past, were in moments of hopelessness. Employees who had once been in humble positions, as he was, were now rising to key roles within the company. The culture Marcos had created was one that valued second chances, continuous effort, and teamwork. What Marcos had understood on his trip was that the true legacy is not in what you achieve for yourself, but in what you do for others. Every person who had been a part of his story, from workers to customers, had been touched by his vision. His story, which began in a McDonald's and was marked by humiliation and failure, was now a testimony that circumstances do not determine the future, but the decisions you make in response to them. The man who was fired from McDonald's today runs his own fast food network. These words echoed in his mind as he looked around. No one in their community would have imagined that a free meal could have set off a chain of events that would change the fate of so many lives. That simple decision, at a crucial moment, became the catalyst for monumental change. The final lesson of Mark's life was clear and powerful. It's never too late to start again. Life can hit hard, and sometimes impulsive decisions can feel like the end of everything. However, what Marcos demonstrated with his story is that, despite falls, there is always an opportunity to get up and build something even greater. Sometimes the most difficult moments are the ones that teach us the most valuable lessons, and those lessons are what ultimately lead us to reach our true potential. Marcos thought about his past and how far he had come. When he faced his dismissal from McDonald's, many of his acquaintances thought it would be the end of his story. Some saw him as a victim of his own decisions. However, the man who stood before an audience of businessmen, investors, and employees at all levels today was proof that the smallest decisions, like a free meal, can trigger life-altering changes for thousands of people. As Marcos walked across the stage, he felt grateful. Grateful for every opportunity he had received, for every person who had believed in him, and for every challenge that had strengthened him. Not only had he found success in business, he had discovered what really mattered: the impact one can have on the world through their actions and decisions. The legacy that Marcos would leave was not only that of being a successful businessman, but that of being a leader who never gave up. A man who started with a small action, a gesture of kindness that seemed unimportant, but ended up transforming his life and the lives of many others. His story, his journey, became a beacon of light for those who thought their dreams were unattainable. Finally, Marcos looked at the audience with a humble smile and said, "Today, my life has changed, and the lives of many others have also changed. But this is just the beginning. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you never know how big the impact of a single action can be, no matter how small it may seem. And my hope is that everyone here today remembers that no matter what fate throws at us, we can always change our story if we believe in ourselves and keep moving forward." Marcos' words echoed in every corner of the room. And with that message, the story of a man who began as a simple employee of a fast food restaurant, fired for an impulsive act, closed with an ending that was not only satisfying, but inspiring.